Well, political analyst Bongani Mahlangu joins us via video link to unpack political influence and the issue of South Africa's immigration policies. Bongani, good afternoon. Thanks for your time with us here on the SABC at this hour.
No, greetings to you and greetings to the viewers at home.
Bongani, evaluating South Africa's immigration policy after apartheid, what are your thoughts? How should, migrants and refugees, asylum seekers be included in the social and economic fabric of our nation?
No, thanks. So looking at that politically, the current challenge that we have in this country and those that make the laws, as far as politicians are concerned, is that they believe that realism, which is domestic interest, cannot exist in the context of Pan-Africanism, advancing the continent and the majority of the people in this continent or demographic group. What I mean by that is that you would have an organization such as the ANC at the moment, regardless in the many tongues that they speak with, they seek to advance Pan-Africanism at the cost of domestic interest in the majority, the black majority in South Africa. So then also you'd have the AFF joining them. And then you would have an organization such as the DA that says that there must be some domestic interest, realism. But when you look at them closely, is that they're not advancing domestic interest, but they're actually advancing interest of a demographic group, the whites in particular, who are the owners of the means of production. So when you remove then your immigrants, especially illegal immigrants in this country, it then hampers their profit maximization mechanism as far as labor is concerned. So then the cost of labor for their firms goes up and they won't have anyone to exploit. But then when we go back to the ANC and the EFF, the ANC in particular, what they are struggling with now is to say, how do we advance the South African continent, SADC, and ourselves as South Africa without compromising domestic interests? And that is the dilemma they currently find themselves in. And that's why they are pushing towards an overhaul of the laws, your Refugee Act, your Citizenship Act, and there's one other act, the 3 acts, because they are struggling to find a solution to that. And it's quite possible. I mean, what the ANC fails to do is that they fail to intervene every time there's economic, political, and social instability in African countries, especially within SADC. The latest example was in Zimbabwe, where the ANC, after a SADC report was published, they were the first as a political formation and leader of government in South Africa to congratulate the incumbent, which is the ZANU-PF, Mnangagwa in particular, even in opposition of what the report has in its content. So now that is not a clear way of advancing the African agenda, because the ANC or the government should have intervened in that country to ensure political, economic, and social stability. And once there is that stability, it then minimizes the incentive of the people of that country to want to move around of that country, especially illegal. The same approach advanced to the continent, it then minimizes the incentive of Africans to move around to other countries, South Africa in particular, illegal. And that is when we can then establish or remove the borders and ensure the free movement of people and goods in this country. So you protect your domestic interests by ensure that you make meaningful interventions in those countries. So our government fails to do so. And the people of then these other countries, they feel that since our government fails them, then they can take the chance and come to South Africa. So that is one incentive, but there is also
Bongani, if you can hear me, let me come in there actually, because you've said a lot and I actually want to get a bit deeper, and thank you for those sentiments. Actually bring to the fore the issue of, the white paper on citizenship and refugee protection. Some of the view that the proposals are vague and they seek to solve problems that are not about immigration, and they're not really necessarily addressing, problems that are less about immigration and more about bureaucracy. Providing that it becomes a smokescreen of sorts for the failures of government over the past 30 years into democracy. What's your take then?
All right. So when we look into the failures of bureaucracy, the failures of law, I think in the statement that was made by Home Affairs in order to pass the white paper, which was adopted, in the statement they made, the public statement they made when this white paper was being presented to the public to make comments, they alluded that there have been failures. In fact, Home Affairs, through the minister, went into detail with regards to articulation of these failures. One, they said that you have a Refugees Act that was passed in 1998 in line with your 1951 Convention, 1967 Protocol, and 1969 OAU before it became the AU Convention. So when this Refugee Act was passed, government had no clear policy on migration, asylum, or refugees in this country. When this law was passed, government made no sentiments, or rather, they took it as is and had no exclusion of anything. And then, therefore, in the future that came, it created a problem because they had no reservation in the adoption of these conventions, in the formulation of their own Refugee Act. And then, before your 1994 democracy, your democratic democracy, you have an apartheid state. In an apartheid state, there was no clear asylum policy in South Africa. So then you find that there was an ad hoc policy that was in place, and that ad hoc policy sought to benefit white refugees or white asylum seekers or white immigrants from Zimbabwe, from Mozambique, from Portugal, and other white individuals from other countries as well. So then you find even before the democratic state takes over, there were already illegal refugees coming into South Africa, but they were mainly white and they were protected by the state. So then the government then identifies that there is a deficiency here, there's a weakness in our system's laws here, and then we need to strengthen them. So in so doing, that's when they are trying to now strengthen your Citizenship Act, strengthen your Immigration Act, and your your Citizenship Act, your Birth Act, and your Refugee Act, in order to ensure that they are properly aligned within the framework of South Africa, unlike before. So there has already been that admission from the state via Home Affairs, and that is the current work that is currently taking place in South Africa. And part of that work being accelerated or even coming to the table as is right now, it's because of pressure from the ground.
So, Bongani, given the challenges of managing migration in South Africa, I mean, we're also edging closer to elections. And I wonder from your vantage point how migration is going to affect political campaigning come 2024 and beyond. Bongani, I think you're on mute. Perhaps you could unmute yourself and just answer that question. We did seem to lose your audio there.
All right, I'm sorry about that.
All right, so you were obviously just in conversation. Yes. You were just speaking about political campaigning.
Yes, ceteris paribus, just holding everything else constant and just looking at immigration as a political lobby mechanism. You find that most parties, your Patriotic Alliance, your Action SA, are trying to appeal to the bigger electoral base or the significant electoral base as far as numbers is concerned in this country, and that is the black poor majority. And that is the black poor majority that are affected by illegal immigration, in particular by the competition for state or public services. Example, Krisani Baragwana, you would find that at any given day, about 30% of the patients there are illegal immigrants. So then the people then of South Africa, the black majority has to compete for space. Then you find that the black majority of South Africa, the poor black majority have to also compete for jobs, mainly in your agriculture sector, in your hospitality sector, in restaurants, in hotels, and so forth. So then they are aggrieved because they feel directly the impact of illegal immigration in this country. So then these political formations have then tailored their election campaign around that in order to attract. And also you have your Operation Dudula that started first as an activist movement or a protest movement and morphed into a political formation. Their central and only campaign mechanism has only been that. So there'll be competition in that space. Then you find then your DA, as I alluded earlier, your DA is pro illegal immigration and immigration in general. Why? Because they are protecting the owners and the owners of production, those that own the means of production, because it's them who own your agricultural sector or are significant players in that sector. It is them also who own or significant players in your hotels, your restaurant, your hospitality sector. So once these ones on the left win, then they harm those on the right. Because in South Africa, unfortunately, we have a parallel state. So you have your public, those that rely on public services, and those that rely on private services. So those that rely on private services in the main are DA people, and they rely on this illegal immigrant in order to keep the private sector operational without any issues. But those that are relying on public services are the ones that are aggrieved. So that's where the problem is now. Then you have your ANC and your EFF. So ANC and your EFF, regardless of the language they use, they are pro-Pan-Africanism. But as I said earlier, they are pro-Pan-Africanism, but they do not believe that Pan-Africanism is mutually inclusive with domestic interest. That is the realism theory, or being realistic. And that is what will cost them votes come 2024.
Bongani.
So then votes will go to these
So Bongani, obviously, you know, there's lots to unpack on this front, and I know that we've only touched the surface, we skirted on the surface. We'll continue to unpack it further, particularly as we edge closer to elections next year. That issue is going to definitely come to the fore, but I'll have to leave the conversation there for now. Thank you for your time with us here on the SABC at this hour. Political analyst Bongani Mahlangu joining us via video link, unpacking the political influences and the issues of South Africa's immigration policy and really the impact it's had and where to from here, edging closer to elections.